But COVID cases are approaching record high levels again and are set to rise even higher as the festival season is upon us. Scientists have claimed 1 in 21 people in the UK currently have the virus, and the spread is more prevalent among the under 18s. But are hospitalisations rising too, and should we be worried? Well, joining me to set out the facts is the statistician and political commentator Jamie Jenkins. Jamie, I'll start off with that really obvious question then. Should we be concerned, right? Should we be scrambling for our face masks and locking ourselves in our homes once again?
Yeah, afternoon, Darren. I think some people would be calling for that, but I think let's take a closer look at what's happening at the moment. So these infection numbers that we get, and we have been seeing them rise the last month, they come from the Office for National Statistics, and it's basically a random survey of households. They test people, and then you can kind of extrapolate how many people in the population have probably got COVID overall. And we have seen this rise over the last 4 weeks, and I think it's been driven by kind of the subvariants of Omicron. So remember last December, Omicron hit the country. We saw these mass rise infections, but it was much, much less deadly variant. So we didn't see the kind of corresponding kind of serious illness as what we had there. So it's BA4 and BA5. These are these subvariants, Darren. Now, one of the things with the pandemic is we can look at other countries and see what's been going on there. So they were first identified in South Africa, and Portugal about a month or so back also had the highest cases in Europe. Again, both driven by these new variants, but both saw a rise in cases. They rose for about 4 or 5 weeks, and then they've come back down again. Now, the important thing is you talked about, should we have new restrictions? Should we have masks? Should we do different things like what we've done in the past? And if you look at Portugal, one of our closest neighbours in Europe, they brought no new restrictions in. The cases went up and they've come back down without any intervention. So if we follow the course of what's happening in South Africa and Portugal without any new interventions, we should potentially be seeing this pass in the next couple of weeks, reaching the peak, that is.
What do you think then, Jamie, of Nicola Sturgeon telling the Scottish people to start wearing face masks indoors again? Is this just a step too far?
Well, I think for Nicola Sturgeon, it's a bit richer saying wear masks indoors when obviously she was warned by the police for not wearing masks herself. So I think when it comes to these politicians, the behaviour of the public and asking them to do certain things, you need to practice what you preach. And the evidence on masks overall is pretty divisive in terms of the effectiveness, because the vast majority of people who are wearing masks in public spaces, indoors, on trains, on things, they're not really wearing these medical grade masks, which would probably protect you. So I think Scotland does have the highest infection rate in the country. But I think, when you're just counting numbers of people who've got COVID, people start going and thinking back to the early days where the hospitals were being overrun and people were saying that, everything was going to be carnage in there and lots of deaths. But if you actually look at these new variants, they are far less deadly than what, say, I would have been talking to you a couple of years ago. If we look at the more important metrics of, say, the number of patients in critical care beds, it's about 70 patients across all of England out of 4,180 beds. And that's a quarter of what it was this time last year. So even though infections are significantly higher, the number of patients seriously in hospital is much, much lower. And remember, when you see people talking and you pick up a newspaper, they'll say high numbers of people being admitted to hospital with COVID. Around 2/3 of people who actually go into hospital with COVID aren't actually being treated because of it. They might have had a broken leg, they've gone in for some other treatment, but they do test these people all the time as well. So I would urge some caution, not have any alarm. And if we follow what we're seeing in other parts of the world, we can ride this one out over the next few weeks.
So my viewers watching this thinking, oh my word, not another one. Do you think actually those who are actively trying to keep COVID in the news and keep a degree of fear around it, do you think ultimately they won't get what they want, which, let's be honest, would be further restrictions, Jamie?
Well, I think politically it's more difficult, Darren, now, because if you remember back in December, there were calls for further restrictions and the cabinet was divisive at the time in terms of what they should do. Michael Gove came out a few months after and said he got it wrong. He was pushing for more restrictions and Boris didn't go for that. He hasn't got the very goodwill with the backbenchers, in the Tory party. So trying to get any legislation through Parliament for any further restrictions, I think, is nigh on impossible for Boris Johnson. Now, Nicola Sturgeon and Mark Drakeford may look at it slightly differently in the devolved nations. But again, it's going to be difficult to bring something there when you're not going to have the things in England. And just remember what I just said, Portugal done absolutely nothing. South Africa's done nothing. They've brought nothing new in. Cases have gone up and they've naturally come back down as you kind of that trajectory that you normally see through these different waves.
Yeah, I mean, Jamie, you know, I've had a lot to criticise Boris Johnson over recent times, but actually what he did there, I think, was brilliant, and I was so grateful for him for, you know, saying, no, we've got to stay the course, see this through, and ultimately he was proven right on actually rolling back those draconian lockdown measures and restrictions. But the statistician there that always shines a light on the actual data and not just the fear rhetoric around it, Jamie Jenkins, thank you very much for joining me today.